Hi guys, this is a book I bought at Pilgrim's Book House in Kathmandu. I didn't read that much into it before I decided to buy it, but it has a very interesting title, Saviours and Fools, Confessions of an American Free Tibet Activist. I figured that it must be a boots-on-the-ground account that would debunk some of the myths and simplistic ideologies held by the virtue-signaling new hippies. It turned out to be somewhat different from what I expected. Just like the hippie movement of the 1960s and 1970s, the Free Tibet movement in the West reached its peak after the Dalai Lama was awarded Nobel Peace Prize in 1989. The author is an American activist who was actively involved in Tibetan assistance, or maybe even a bit of resistance during the 1990s. This book is basically an account of his adventures and misadventures. By the early 2000s, when the author was trying to get his book published, the Beijing Olympics were trending. It became more fashionable to marvel at China's economic miracle. The calls for boycott for tragic events like 1989 Tiananmen massacre and the brutal suppression of Tibetans in Tibet became somewhat muted. The Free Tibet movement was no longer a topic that publishers in America and Europe were interested in. Fortunately for the author Rinaldi, he managed to find an Indian publisher. Hence, this book. Now, on the copyright page is a disclaimer saying that the views and opinions expressed in the book are individual assertions of the author. The publisher does not take any responsibility for the same in any manner whatsoever. Now, the same shall solely be the responsibility of the author. Now, I'll be honest, the book is not very easy to follow. The main theme is that Westerners like to come across as saviors of the underdogs, but the support they give is seldom sustainable and reliable. Rinaldi, the author, pointed out that this sort of fatigue happened very early during the occupation of Tibet by the PRC, when the CIA was covertly supporting Tibetan resistance with weapons. When it was no longer feasible or possible to support the resistance covertly, the CIA pulled out, leaving Tibetan fighters in the lurch. Rinaldi wrote, quote, "Good intentions are wonderful, but they always seem to mask a greater policy goal, agenda, or some individual self-interest that remain to be revealed. Step carefully and don't take what they say at face value," unquote. It's something that he wished he knew before he plunged headlong into the Free Tibet movement. After giving up on his American dream, the author arrived in Nepal, and after months of travel, long after he had left the kingdom, he couldn't take his mind off the suffering of the Tibetan refugees. Then he talked about America's dealings with the International Campaign for Tibet, or ICT. Western-based Tibetan activism started around 1987 when Western adventurers traveling in Tibet ran into a bloody riot and witnessed violent Chinese oppression firsthand. Now, these righteous folks decided that they had to get the story out and create awareness of the Tibetan people's plight and China's human rights abuses. Now, the ICT was born, and the Tibetan struggle became internationalized for the first time. Now, back in the 1990s, Tibet had the full attention of the US Congress. American presidents from George Bush Sr. to Bill Clinton pressured China to improve its human rights record. But in reality, China held on to its status as the most favored nation without bowing to the pressure. In 1998, Rinaldi joined a demonstration outside a cinema showing the movie Kundun. Demonstrators shouted "Free Tibet" and "Shame on China" until a BMW driver drove by and asked them why they were so angry when Tibetans now have sewers because of Chinese occupation. The author was stumped. What were they fighting for, really? Spiritual purity? A return to feudal Tibet? The author switched career from banking to hospital work as a laboratory phlebotomist. He turned up at the Tibetan Reception Center at Kathmandu and volunteered his services at the clinic. Mistaken for a doctor, he tried to pass off as one and proceeded to do vaccinations. Then he talked about how he smuggled 3,000 doses of Indian BCG vaccine into Nepal. And he heard that Chinese agents were traveling deep into Nepalese territory to forcibly repatriate undocumented Tibetans. He and his friend Ramesh decided to do a little detective work, hoping that by exposing them, they could shame Kathmandu and Washington into doing more to protect the exiles. Now, the first stop was a Nepalese police post at the riverside village of Barabise. They had hoped to find evidence of corruption and collusion with the Chinese. Stupidly, the author asked the border guards point blank whether the Chinese came over. Foolhardy or otherwise, he refused to return to Kathmandu even after being threatened with jail by the border police. They headed north towards the Tibetan border. At the border town of Kodari near the crossing, the mood was tense. They noticed plainclothes Chinese people. Incredibly, Rinaldi and Ramesh had the audacity to get on the bridge. They encountered sinister Chinese agents and retreated to the immigration office on the Nepal side. As he was taking pictures, he was assaulted, detained, and interrogated. Soaked in blood, he was dumped into the rubbish pile. That's the most interesting part of the whole book. Now next, Rinaldi visited Tibet itself, going by the same path, except that this time he was going as a legitimate tourist with an appointed minder. I wonder why he was not identified and blacklisted after that violent encounter with Nepal immigration. Now the rest of the chapter reads like a standard travelogue for the usual destinations in Tibet. Nevertheless, he had a mission, and that was to track down his Tibetan friend's sister. He managed to find her, shot a video of her message to her brother, and brought it back to his friend Kelsang in San Diego. After watching the video, his Tibetan friend Kelsang left America to reunite with his sister in Tibet. At this point, the timeline is not clear, but the author wrote about his departure from the clinic in Kathmandu and finding work at another hospital back home to finance yet another trip to Nepal. Our statement caught my attention. Quote, "I see the Free Tibet movement as just like any other threat-based industry, where an image of constant crisis must be maintained in order to sustain an urgency to raise funds," unquote. And it seems that Tibetan NGOs were not the only ones keen on raising funds. Rinaldi recounted a scary encounter with a bunch of Nepalese youths who claimed to be raising funds for the Maoist insurgency. They turned out to be amateur robbers trying to look professional. Then the author started talking about the Manaslu region and the Sum Valley through which Tibetan refugees made their way into Nepal. A bit of personal experience here. I find the people in the Manaslu region a little less friendly than those elsewhere in Nepal. Rinaldi brought his friends Ram and Ramesh to explore the area. Their reconnaissance yielded some interesting results. Tibetans who made it across the passes were rude, did not speak the local languages, and they carried Chinese yuan. Fights often broke out between the refugees and the locals. They mentioned that Chinese money was not easy to change in Kathmandu. Well, not anymore if you have been to Kathmandu recently. Rinaldi wanted to play white savior by providing a money-changing service for the refugees. it turned out that getting foreign trackers in the area who might be going to China to exchange their money with the refugees was a better idea. Namche Bazaar, the Sherpa capital of Nepal, and a major stopover on the Everest trek. I've passed through this settlement many times, but not being involved with the movement, Rinaldi offers a glimpse into the dodgy world of border guards, refugees and spies. And the crossing guides were, of course, crooks who found every excuse to demand for more money from the innocent fugitives. He goes through a detailed description of the arduous crossing. Many of the crossers were children who would lose their toes to frostbite. Some died of hypothermia. Now, he made a cynical observation of how some privileged children were carried on the trek by their less fortunate peers. Rinaldi again tries to play hero by going around the Khumbu Valley looking for undocumented Tibetans so as to provide them with the assistance they needed. Now, noting that the Nepalese authorities treated the refugees badly, Rinaldi decided to impersonate the UN and send a letter to the government offices throughout Nepal. Now, since these folks had probably never seen a letter from the UN, he had them fooled. In his letter, he warned border police not to repatriate Tibetans back to China. He made 50 copies and sent them out to government offices near the border. Incredibly, it worked. Here's the letter. You can pause the video if you want to read it. In 2014, Human Rights Watch noted that the government of Nepal had failed in the gentleman agreement to provide safe passage to undocumented Tibetans on their way to India. He also criticized the UN for all talk and no action. The gentleman's agreement also meant that Nepal's border security would look the other way when undocumented Tibetans crossed into Nepal. The authorities started to crack down on Tibetan political activities. The Chinese ambassador raised concerns about Nepal turning into a playground for anti-China activities. Nepal became caught in the middle. US congressmen lobbying for Tibet shouted at Nepal. Nobody dared to criticize China. China threatened Nepal with economic sanctions. Subsequently, even US Congressman Frank Wolf warned Nepal that the US might withdraw aid. Rinaldi saw the end of the Western-based Free Tibet movement, with politicians trying to score points instead of helping the Tibetan people. Then, the author touched on the horrific cases of self-immolation in Tibet. Strong statements came from various governments, but nothing much beyond that. In 1997, US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright oversaw the Tibet Policy Act, which made the audacious demand for having a US consulate in Lhasa. The Chinese government probably just laughed it off. Social media campaigns got plenty of likes and followers, but insultingly, China still made it into the UN Council for Human Rights. Meanwhile, Facebook banned self-immolation videos. The Western governments are, for the most part, squarely in China's pocket. The Tibetan cause became a trivial concern in the face of trade sanctions and economic retaliation from the Great Dragon. Clinton, Bush, and Obama all avoided meeting the Dalai Lama. Rinaldi lamented that all these free Tibet movements, all that they managed to accomplish after millions of dollars have been pumped, was to raise awareness. Westerners have failed, and Tibetans themselves must take over with a new ally, India. The author advocated that activists should stop scolding China, deprioritize raising awareness, and cut off the money and make Tibetans more financially independent. He listed a lot of reasons for India to take over the Free Tibet movement from the West. But frankly, I don't see how India could use the Tibet card against China. In the final 2 chapters, the author described his visit to Dharamsala. He noted that Tibetans were getting tired of foreigners who view them as a novelty. T-shirts now read just Tibet without the word free. He then wrote about his meeting with Lobsang Sanjay, the Prime Minister of the Tibetan government in exile. Interestingly, the Sikong, or Prime Minister, had plans to return all Tibetans to Tibet eventually, if not in 5 years, then in 50 years. Rinaldi was then asked to give a presentation to the Central Tibet Administration staff. He talked about his vaccine smuggling program, his money exchange program, and his work at the clinic. His point was clear. The West was not going to provide answers to the Tibet issue. They had to rely on themselves and on India. Finally, an audience with the Dalai Lama. They didn't talk much. He hoped that His Holiness could get some rest. He had been too busy entertaining visitors. Rinaldi let go of his own desire to steer the course for the Tibetan exiles. Okay, I've finished a book, but I can't say that I enjoyed reading it much because the narrative doesn't flow smoothly and the timeline is a bit haphazard. In spite of what Rinaldi is trying to say, the author did not seem able to dissociate his ego from the cause. He seemed to be working alone, the only person in the story. Everyone else was like a cardboard character. There are 2 manifestations of white supremacy. One is the master-servant mentality, and the other one is the hero-victim mentality. A Western-based Free Tibet movement runs out of steam because the media has its own agenda, the politicians have their own agenda, and the zealous youngsters eventually grow up. The only people who can sustain this movement are perhaps the Tibetans themselves, but then maybe not. A Tibetan born in India once told me that she's very happy living in India and enjoying her holidays in Tibet. She can't relate to her forefathers' struggles under Chinese occupation. But here's the thing, she would never want to live in Tibet without all its modern amenities.